समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
You can always count on Donald Trump to make you do strange, unfamiliar things, but also he poses new challenges to you. Like for example, figuring out India's rice production, rice exports, and you know what? We discover in the process that India is something that we should have always known. We knew that India's food production has really gone up, food grain production, but India is the largest producer of rice in the world. India is also the largest exporter of rice in the world, accounting for a little over 30%, 30% all of the world's exports of rice. However, why does Trump remind us of that? Because Trump, for some reason, he had a meeting in the cabinet room or in the White House with over agricultural issues. So he had some farmers representatives, farmers lobby representatives. Also, he had his Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and his Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins. There, some people said, and he said, people are telling me. He said, people are telling me. He didn't say he's seen any evidence. He said, people are telling me that India is dumping rice in America. India is dumping rice. Then he said, Thailand is also dumping rice in America. And he said, this is very bad and he's going to stop it. And he spoke as Donald Trump usually speaks. He said, they shouldn't be dumping. I mean, I heard that. Suni sunai baat hai. I heard that from others. You can't do that. And he said that he's going to resolve it by using tariffs, by putting more tariffs. And he said tariffs resolve everything. It takes just 2 minutes, right? All of that's fine, except there is no problem with India's or anybody's rice exports to America. America itself is a major rice producer. This is not it is not the biggest rice. It is not the biggest rice producer in the world, but it's a sizable rice producer in the world. So if you see the ranking of rice producers in the world, see the chart on your screen, America would be about 12, 13 or thereabouts, because Cambodia at $8.47 million is number 10 in the world. America production varies between 9 million and currently estimated to be about 7.5 million. That's the reason I'm estimating that it will be about number 11 or number 12. At the same time, while America produces this rice, America is both an exporter and importer of rice. America, in fact, exports more rice, 3 million tons, than it imports 1.6 million tons. So where is the question with rice being dumped on America? Question, however, arises is that if America is exporting 3 million tons of rice, how come they are also importing 1.6 million tons? That's because America is importing special types of rice or special varieties of rice, which either is used in delicacies, for example, the basmati that comes from India, or the jasmine rice which comes from Thailand. Also, these are countries, India or Southeast Asian countries, that have a lot of diaspora in America. So they consume these varieties of rice as well as also the food industry, the restaurant industry. So the imports really are very small. And there also, if you look at the total imports in America, Thailand is exporting to America almost twice, in fact, in some years, 2.5 times as much as India does. What are India's exports to America? It really is nothing. It really is nothing. Let me give you the data. If you see India's basmati exports to America, most of what America imports from India is basmati. India's basmati exports to America, India's total export of basmati rice is 60.65 lakh tons or 6.65 million tons. These are the total exports of basmati rice, of which the US only imports 2.74 lakh tons. That that is just about 4% of all of India's basmati exports to the world go to America. Only 4%. Now look at the larger rice export figures. If you look at the other rice exports, India exports about 14 million tons of non-basmati rice. So together, basmati, non-basmati, India exports about 20 million tons. In fact, last year it was more than 20 million tons. This year, US Department of Agriculture estimates it might go to 2.2 million tons. This year, the US Department of Agriculture estimates that it may go to 22 million tons or even more. As I see in Udit Bubna's story, according to Indian Rice Exporters Federation, this export of Indian rice is expected to rise to 30 million tons just by 2026-27. In that equation, at this point, if India is exporting 6 million tons of basmati rice, I told you 4% of that, about 4% goes to America by volume or by value. Of India's non-basmati exports, which is 14 billion tons, how much is imported by America? Hold your breath. Out of 14 million tons, it is 61,342 tons. It's not even a rounding error, right? When you make calculations, you settle to the last decimal point. It will not even feature on the last decimal point. So what the hell is it that Trump is complaining about? What's he talking about? Donald Trump ko gussa kyun aata hai? The fact is that expression has become such a cliche. So the only one to whom that expression fits is actually old Albert Pinto, right? After that, we misuse it everywhere. But in this case, I don't even think it's a case of Donald Trump ko gussa aata hai. I think it's a case of him trying to just making a little show that I could use this, I could use that. He is a show off. And also he knows that trade talks are going on with India. So anything like this will become a talking point in India, and that will give leverage. US trade delegation, in fact, arrived in Delhi earlier this week, and they have started their negotiations. So maybe it was timed like that, or maybe it was just a statement off the cuff that he made. However, this has made us focus on India's rice production. And this is something that we have not celebrated sufficiently. So we have to celebrate the fact there are some downsides to it, as there will always be. But we have to celebrate, first of all, the fact that India is the world's largest producer of rice. India is ahead of China, marginally ahead, but ahead of China. And looks like that gap will increase because area under rice in India is going up, partly because Government of India procures all the rice. If you look at the complete figures that you have for the last growing year, that is 2004-2025 growing year, India's production is 150 million, China is 145.28 million, so 15 crore ton India produces of just the rice, and that amounts to 28% of global rice production. China comes up next at 27%. China comes up next with 27% of the global production. And then you come to Bangladesh, 7%, Indonesia, 6%, Vietnam, 5%, Thailand, 4%, Philippines, Myanmar, Pakistan, Cambodia, 2% each. The important thing is countries like Indonesia and the Philippines, for example, also Bangladesh, they are large producers of rice, but at the same time they are substantive importers of rice as well, because their populations are almost exclusively rice eating. So what they produce is not enough for them. India also exports to many of these countries, and India is also exploring, many of these markets, particularly by looking at the new varieties that may be favored in these countries. That is something that Udit Bubna, who's one of our correspondents, reported in his story. You will see a screenshot of the story on your screens. He will also join me in just a little while to explain some aspects of the story. Again, before we move off from America to the larger question of India's rice production and rice exports and rice trade, let me also give you some figures in value for us to understand this better. The value of total Indian rice exports to America, the latest value for the last year is $337 million, right? That is $33.7 crore dollars. The previous year it was 30.0 crore. So it's about 30 crore, 37 crore dollars. That's a very small amount in America's overall trade. Rice imports, overall rice imports in America's overall trade in the list in the US Commerce Department's on the US Commerce Department's website is 275. So it's not a major import. However, even from India, the 337 million or 33.7 crore dollars worth of rice that they import, see what percentage that is of India's exports of nearly $13 billion worth of rice. $13 billion worth of rice or thereabouts. And they are rising all the time. India is a very major exporter of rice. And as we mentioned to you, this $337 billion is also almost entirely basmati because a rounding error of 61,000 tons, I think two neighborhoods in Delhi, maybe Chitranjan Park and a couple of other places will consume in about a month or so. That is worth almost nothing. In fact, many countries in the world will suffer severely if India stopped exporting its rice. In 2022-23, for a while, India had put some restrictions on rice exports because prices were going up domestically. That was also around time Prime Minister Modi was coming up with his plan to extend until 2028 his scheme to distribute free food grain, 5 kilos of free food grain to everybody who was poor in India. That's about 80 crore people. India put restrictions on the export of most varieties of rice, and those that it allowed, it put 20% export duty on. That also led to the rise in global rice prices, and many countries complained about it, that India was squeezing the global market by not allowing exports. So India has sizable leverage by way of its excess rice production. Now again, as I told you earlier, Donald Trump has at least persuaded us or forced us to look at India's rice and India's power as a rice exporter. Who's buying India's rice? Look at basmati rice. That's what the Americans are buying. But Americans are not India's biggest buyers of basmati rice. Americans are actually at number 6. So who's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Saudi Arabia is number 1. They buy almost, not exactly, but almost 4 times as much basmati from India as the US does. Iraq is number 2. Iran is number 3. These are all pulao, biryani type countries, right? Rice eating Arab countries. And they like aromatic rice. Saudi Arabia number 1, Iraq number 2, Iran number 3, UAE number 4. Number 5th is also a Middle Eastern country, but think about which country it is, and it's above the US. That is Yemen. Yemen buys more basmati from India than the US does. Then comes UK and then many other Middle Eastern countries, including Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and so on. Together, put it all together, India exports it's all ballpark, about $6 billion worth of basmati rice. India also exports, as I told you, about $13 billion overall. You also know that in terms of tonnage, India exports a lot more of the non-basmati rice. So I will give you a larger figure. The larger figure is that non-basmati rice accounts for 70%, 70% of all of India's rice exports. Almost none of that goes to America. 70% of almost 70% of all of India's rice exports, but 48% of the value. At the same time, basmati, which is about, by implication, about 30% of India's rice exports by volume, accounts for 52% of the value. These are all ballpark figures, which means that basmati generally costs about twice as much as non-basmati rice. Now, basmati rice, I told you who's buying. It's the Middle Eastern countries are buying, all the richest Middle Eastern countries, but also Yemen is buying, because these are part of the traditional food, because this is a part of the traditional food chain. Non-basmati rice, the poorest countries in the world are buying. In fact, if India stopped exporting that, if India started producing less rice, if India's rice surpluses went down, as many of us have been advocating that India should grow more pulses, India should grow more maize, more oilseeds, because those are things that India imports. India should produce less rice to conserve water, etc. If that happens, think of how much Africa will suffer. So India's biggest buyer for non-basmati rice is a country that you hear about not that often, Benin. When did you last hear about Benin? Benin buys the largest amount of non-basmati rice from India. In value, it is a little bit more than the total American imports from India, which is mostly basmati. So Benin is at number one. Guinea, a country as poor as that. Guinea is number two. Cote d'Ivoire, which used to be called Ivory Coast, that's at number three. Then Togo. Then comes Bangladesh. But even Bangladesh, the value they import is about the same as the US does. Then Senegal, Vietnam, I told you they produce a lot, but they also import some. Senegal, Vietnam, then Liberia, Sierra Leone, Somalia, Nepal. If you just add Liberia and Sierra Leone, that will be about as much as America's rice imports from India. So what the hell is Donald Trump complaining about? Sharam aani chahiye. It's a matter of shame and embarrassment that his imports are just about as much as Liberia and Sierra Leone, two broken countries put together. In fact, if you add Somalia to Liberia and Sierra Leone, that number becomes much higher than America's imports. And if you also then bring in Nepal, it becomes almost 1.5 times of America's imports. So this whole story is poppycock. Let me just use Donald Trump's kind of language. This whole idea that India is dumping rice in America is bullshit. Also because the rice that America buys from India, basmati, America does not produce and America cannot produce. Only two countries in the world can produce that rice, and that too in certain fixed geographies, predetermined geographies of these countries. Countries are India and Pakistan. Basmati has a GI tag to be grown in certain parts of India, certain parts of Pakistan. To understand this better, Madhya Pradesh started growing a basmati variety. That rice cannot be marketed as a basmati because that does not have the GI tag. So Americans can't grow basmati, Mexico can't grow basmati, Thailand doesn't grow basmati, Philippines doesn't grow basmati. Why? Because they cannot grow basmati. It's like Darjeeling tea will only come out of some geographies around Darjeeling. That is the issue with this particular variety of rice. So this whole debate is nonsensical. And how much more duty does he want to put on it? It had 10% to begin with. He's added 40% now because he took India's basic duties to 25% and added 25% punitive, 50%. Price has gone up, but people who eat basmati still buy basmati. Can they buy basmati from Pakistan at 19% duty? They sure can. But how much does Pakistan produce? It does produce some, but does it really have that kind of surplus? Pakistan only accounts for 2% of the global production of rice of all kinds. Just 2%. India is 28%. Pakistan does export a little bit, but just a little bit, and that too mostly basmati. Now, India has had a very good agricultural year. In fact, India for the last many years has done better. Agricultural growth has been good. 4% is almost the maximum a large economy can get by way of its agricultural growth. India is not quite there, but India is close there. It looks like this year also will be 3.5%. That's very high for agricultural growth. If you look at food grain production, just in the year concluding now, and this is data from November 20, 2025, as recent as that, India's food grain production has risen this year by 7.65%, which is brilliant. India has had its largest ever harvest of rice, wheat, soybeans, groundnut. India is very short of soybeans and groundnut oil. That's besides the point. Still the highest ever harvest. Again, for comparisons, in 2015-16, India's total food grain production was 251 million tons, 251.4, that is 25 crore 15 lakh, 25 crores 15 lakh tons. Now, within 9 years, it's come to 35 crores 73 lakh tons. So Indian farmers have been growing. Indian farm output has been growing. It is just that it's growing in many areas which are not that profitable. So return on capital employed, gross value added is not that good. And that's where some debating points come in. When we come to those, I will have Udit join us to make more sense of this. However, just to give you an idea of what India exports, I told you India exports more than I told you India has most recently in the most I told you in the most recent financial year concluded. Now, when you deal with agriculture, the year business gets a bit complicated because some countries will see it as financial year. For convenience, we see it as financial year beginning 1st of April, ending 31st March. But late Pranab Mukherjee used to tell us, you must understand there is a rice year and there is a wheat year. Because you know what? Rice is mostly a kharif crop in India, but not entirely a kharif crop in India. Rice is about 75% a kharif crop in India, summer crop, about 20-25% a rabi crop in India, or what would be winter in the north. In the south, it's not the winter. Similarly, wheat more or less is a rabi crop in India, but in some parts of India, it's not. That's why in the Indian system, there is the concept of a rice year and a wheat year. It is based on that concept that government also calculates the amount of food grain it needs to have in its warehouses for food security. So it will be some amount when the fresh crops comes out, and then it runs out until the next harvest comes out. But on the eve of the next harvest, even on the eve of the next harvest, a minimum has to be maintained just in case the crop fails. That is needed for India's food security. That is built around rice year and wheat year. However, for our ease of calculation, we look at the financial year. So in the last financial year, ending March 31, we exported about 2 crore tons of rice, of which basmati was 59 lakh tons, a little less than 1/3. Parboiled rice was almost a half of it, almost a half of the whole exports, that is 90.44 lakh tons. Non-broken rice was 33.23 lakh tons. Broken rice was 7.95 lakh tons. Other varieties of rice, again, another about 8 lakh tons. So India is an exporter of rice in all categories. At which point, I think I should stop giving any more gyan and get Udit to join us. Udit, good of you to join in. And you know what? It looks to me like Donald Trump leaked the paper to you. Because just before he spoke about rice, you did this marvelous story on rice. And I read the headline, you will see it on your screens. 172 countries and counting, India looks to hit new record in rice exports, but there is a flip side. So India's rice exports now go to 172 countries. 172 countries. And Udit, did you have an indication that Donald Trump was going to talk about this and bring rice into limelight, boring rice into limelight?
Absolutely not, because in terms of the exports that India does to US, it's totally insignificant. So I don't think that Donald Trump would have time to say about like few $1 billion worth of things.
Yeah, because he's only importing 337 million, and that too is almost entirely basmati, which you can't get from anywhere else. So now let's look at some of the graphics that we used with your story, and those graphics will run on your screen. So first is India's rice exports in value in US $1 billion. And that's gone up, I noticed, from 2019-20. It's nearly doubled, almost exactly doubled to 2024-5. Run us through these figures and why is this happening?
This figure represents that the India's rice exports has been consistently rising in direct correlation with the India's production. That is also increasing. And also that the India's exports to the countries is continuously rising. Like
the number of countries is increasing.
Exactly. The numbers of countries is increasing, and some countries even the quantity itself is increasing to the already existing customers for India. In the chart, it looks like that it has been consistently rising, except for 23-24 when it witnessed slightly dip. Now that is due to some of the restriction that has been put on by governments due to surge in global prices, and also to ensure food security in India. And same is with regards to the volume as well. Now
that's our second chart.
Yeah. And so what the volume suggests that India has already touched 20.2 million tons of rice in 24-25 financial year. And what the Indian Rice Exporters Federation say that it is poised to grow by 16%. Now, if it grows by 16% at 20.2 million, it will pass the previous high of 22.3 million tons in 2022-23 year. So that means that India will export its highest rice in the current
more than 23.5 million tons.
Exactly, exactly. If this 16% holds true. And according to the Indian Rice Exporter Federation, this could touch to 30 million tons by next financial year, with it 26-27.
Now we come to the third chart, that is India's rice production. Once again, it's a beautiful chart because between 2019-20, just 5 years back to now, look at the growth: 118 million tons to 151 million tons. It's fantastic. It's almost a 40% increase over 5 years. So take us through this also, and is it happening because more areas, more land is growing rice, or because our yields are going up? And there's a concept of paddy yield and then milled rice yield. Just explain that.
So the rice production has been consistently rising. Now it is due to both the factors. Now the India yield is also improving, what the USDA data shows, and also the land is also increasing. Now, basis the experts that we talked to, so one of the reasons that the production is going up is due to the government's incentives that is being offered, including the MSP, minimum support price, that is all the state governments are offering to the farmers. Now that is one of the reasons that the production is going up. And also that last year India surpassed China to become the largest producer of rice when it touched 150 million tons. So the paddy field is the unhusked rice that is harvested from per acre, whereas the milled yield is the harvested final grain of rice that is yielded per acre. So in India's case, the yield has slowly been improving. From 2.4 tons per hectare in 2015-16, it has now become to 2.92 tons in 24-25. However, USDA data shows that China is way ahead than India in terms of meal yield. So China is at 5.01 tons per hectare, which is almost twice of that of India. So that is like one of the reasons that the production has been going up, because the yield are improving for India. So is the acreage, which is the land in which the rice is harvested.
Udit, that's great to see this production. Now, if I asked you, all of you, a little trick question: which Indian state is the biggest producer of rice? Think about it. No Googling, no chat GPT. Grok, don't even try. It'll give you wrong answers. But just think about it, because they will be a little surprised there. This is not a quiz to be answered tomorrow or next week. I will answer it in the next couple of minutes. But I will answer it in the next couple of minutes. But just think about it. Which state is the largest producer of rice in India? Which is the second largest? Which is the third largest? So on and so forth. You will see some surprises there. That said, we come to the next aspect, which is how much rice are we storing in our warehouses. The government of India is storing in its warehouses. So that's the next chart. Please see this chart and see how this number, it's a bit zigzag, but generally you can take a line like this. 2015, it was 11 million tons. Today, as of last month, it was 33.6 million tons. It is thrice as much as it was in 2015. And this is despite the fact that Modi government is distributing so much of the food grain free. So first of all, where has it come from and what does it mean? Because you answered some of these in your story, you've also quoted some experts.
Yeah. So this 33.6 million tons that that India is storing is according to the Food Corporation of India website. Now, this is almost 3 times the buffer norms that is defined by the government itself, which is at 10.25 million tons. So basically, India is holding 3 times more rice than what is the government buffer norms are. Now, these means, according to the experts, like so much of rice shows that it's a mishandling and mismanagement on the part of FCA and also on part of government. Now, the other flip side of this, what some of the experts say, is that India is a very highly rice consuming country. The people of India consumes more than 100 million tons of rice annually. Now, if India is producing and storing more, now if in case in certain year, if there is a drought or if there is some unforeseen events, now it can cut production by somewhere around 15 to million tons. Now that is like a flip side of the argument that, if India needs to have so much of storage, because in case of unforeseen events, now because India consumes so much of rice, so how will it get used?
So I'll give you the editorial point. The editorial view is, which is a scientific view, that these calculations are based on the science and history, that how much buffer stock is needed. Right now, these buffer stocks have swelled up simply because of MSP. Too many farmers are putting too much land under paddy, and you don't know what to do with it. You know what? A lot of it is being distributed free, which is fine, but there is a limit to how much you can distribute free. Our godowns are not that good, so a lot will be eaten up by rats and other vermin, and a hell of a lot will then be given away for making ethanol, which is not the most efficient use of rice, because remember, as Professor Ashok Gulati of ICRIER tells Udit in his story, and he has repeated this for a long time, producing 1 kilo of rice requires 3,000 liters of water. Paddy cultivation is highly water intensive. It pulls out a lot of water. It also needs fertilizer, and in many states like Punjab, which don't have such a heavy monsoon as say some of the eastern states might, this becomes a real drag on the soil, because subsoil water is really going down. So you've talked to some experts and they've got some answers as well.
Yeah, I mean, so basically what some of the experts say is that one of the things that the farmer can do is a technique called direct seeded rice. Now, if farmers DSR. So if farmers use this DSR technique, so basically DSR is where the seeds is directly sown into the field instead of the traditional practice of transplanting seedling into the flooded fields. Now, if they can do this, now DSR can reduce the use of water, can also reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by about 35%, and also lower the cultivation cost by around rupees 3,000 to 30, and also lower the cultivation cost by around rupees 3,000 per acre.
Yeah, and good thing is that some of these DSR varieties have now just been released by IARI. In your story, you quote the scientist there?
Yeah, so the A.K. Singh, the director of Indian Agriculture Research Institute, said that instead of cutting rice production due to surplus, India should adopt a more climate resilient techniques like DSR. So because of these benefits, that it uses less of water by 35% and also reduces greenhouse emissions by 35%. So if India needs to go on path of producing more rice, so it needs to adopt a more climate friendly practices.
So 2 of these varieties have now been released for multiplication, and hopefully next year's Kharif crop these will be used. And it's very brave and very wise of Modi government that they tossed the unscientific Luddite doubts, because remember, these are not genetically modified, and these are not imported from an MNC. These are developed by our own scientists by using what is called as CRISPR or gene editing technologies. This is not a case of an alien gene or a gene from another species being inserted in the rice seed. This is just the editing of the gene of the same rice seed. So there were the usual Luddite doubts, kya ho jayega, kyun kiya, vagara, vagara. But Modi government has done it. These 2 varieties are now being multiplied, and hopefully next year farmers will see their benefit, because if you no longer need to flood the paddy fields, so much water will be saved, and also the period of the crop will be shorter. So this will also help reduce the business of stubble burning as well. And finally, I haven't forgotten, I had asked you a riddle, which is the state with the highest rice production in the country. So the answer is, if you guessed it right, congratulations to you. Let me know in your comments. The answer, however, is Telangana. It was a surprise to me as well. Telangana at 16.87 million tons is the largest rice producer in the country, followed by West Bengal at 15.75, then Uttar Pradesh 12.5, Punjab comes at number 4, 11.82. There is, however, one difference because people would have thought Punjab is the biggest producer. In a way, Punjab is the biggest because Punjab is not the largest producer by volume of rice, but it's the largest producer of rice surplus because Punjab hardly consumes any rice. Also, bulk of India's basmati is produced in Punjab, some in Haryana, some in Western UP, Dehradun and those areas also, but bulk of it is produced in Punjab. So Punjab comes at number 4. Punjab comes at number 4, Tamil Nadu at number 5, Andhra Pradesh at number 6, Bihar at number 7, Chhattisgarh at number 8, Odisha at number 9, Assam at number 10 and Haryana at number 11. But once again, Haryana may be at number 11 by way of total rice production, but it will be a major contributor to the surplus pool nationally. And Udit, we are particularly proud to have you here because you are a graduate of the Print School of Journalism.